Okay, you are listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHWWPPM. Tonight on the program, we will be joined by City Council's newest member, Councilmember Mike Driscoll, and our very own Denise Clay Murray will report live from the NABJ convention in Las Vegas, Nevada. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. And how was the trip out to Vegas? You literally did the interview with Councilmember Driscoll in your car as you were getting to the airport, which is incredible dedication.
Hey, got it. The show must go on, even
That's
if
right.
I'm running late, to the airport. Actually, our flight was fine. There were a whole lot of folks, that local journalists, that are in town that are attending the NAB, and it's actually the National Association of Black Journalists and the National Association of Hispanic Journalists are meeting together this year. Every 2 years, we get together for a joint conference. The next one is in 2024, and hopefully, we can do a show from there because
Uh-huh.
usually, on those even number elections like 2020 and 2024, we get presidential candidates. So maybe we can, do a show from the next NABJ, NAHJ, and get some people on to talk about the upcoming presidential races. But we're here in Vegas at the Caesar's Palace Hotel, and it's exactly what you would think it is. It's big, it's loud, it's a whole lot of people, losing their houses at the crap table, and in between all of that, it's people learning more about such things as how to be a better investigative reporter, how to better teach journalism, and the diversity issues that I feel like we've been talking about my entire career.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was in the master's program at Temple 4 years ago. I guess I graduated from there after switching careers, and we were probably having the same discussions in class that you were having when you were in class and are still having now. I feel like there's so much of that that still hasn't been rectified yet.
Oh yeah.
We definitely want to hear more about that in the second half of the show. But first, we're going to open up with the interview Denise and I did yesterday, actually, with Councilmember Mike Driscoll. Councilmember, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So before we get into council a little bit, can you tell us a little bit about your background? Because you are the most recent member to join City Council.
I am. So I'm a lifelong Northeast Philadelphian. I grew up in a little area called the Oxford Circle, and I went to St. Martin de Tours Grammar School, which at the time was the largest parochial grammar school in the world. And then I graduated and went to Cardinal Doherty High School, and I believe that was the largest Catholic high school at the time in the world. So I come from big parishes and big families. And then I went on to LaSalle College to get a teaching degree in English and secondary ed. And then I went on to the University of Pennsylvania to get a master's degree in government administration. Was lucky enough to serve in Governor Casey's administration as Deputy Secretary for General Services, which essentially was the business arm of state government. And then I returned to Philadelphia, my hometown, after 7.5 years with the governor, and I went into the private sector. And then about 10 years ago, I ran and won a term in the State House of Representatives, where I served for the last 8 years, and then got elected in May and took the oath of office in June of 2022 to assume my new responsibilities here in the city of Philadelphia.
So what are some of the major differences between serving in the State House and now serving the City Council?
Well, from a legislative standpoint, going from being in the minority now being in the majority, my voice will be heard a lot more at the local level, just by virtue of controlling the legislature, for being the Democrats. The House of Representatives in Harrisburg is skewed very heavily in the Senate and in the House to the Republican Party, well, the majority party, I should say, and the majority party controls the agenda. So we can only fight for a voice at the table, by being where we are in the minority. And then we rely also on the Democratic governor to advance initiatives that we care about and or fight against bad stuff that the legislature enacts.
And as a new member, especially the way you came in, typically when if it were a normal election year, the incoming council members would have some time to adjust, and there are people who come in and talk about different things. You were just sort of put right into your seat, and I saw your first council meeting. I thought he was just sworn in. What is that learning curve like when you're kind of doing it on the fly like that?
Larry, that's a great question, and now I'll reference what council president said during my swearing in. He said, "Why didn't you wait 2 more weeks until after this budget was over?" And it might have been easier, but that's not what we signed up for. We wanted the 6th Councilmatic to have a voice in this year's budget. I wanted to have my voice in weighing in on the reduction of the BERT tax, the reduction of the wage tax. I wanted to be part of sending a message to not only my district, but to the city and the business community as a whole, because I interacted quite a bit with the diverse chambers of commerce who were very much pushing for this agenda. And I wanted to make sure I was part of that voice. And while I was nervous because, again, we were meeting via Zoom or Teams, whatever we were on, and the bills were being called not necessarily in order, both in the committee as a whole and in our first council meeting and in our final council meeting where we enacted the budget. Tommy and I were working closely on making sure we understood what was before us and made sure we took the appropriate vote to make sure that we were accurately reflected on what was a difficult budget, but I think was a very good budget.
And regarding budget or really anything else that you've been working on just for the last couple of months, what have been your sort of early observations? What are some of the challenges you've seen? What are some of the opportunities you see?
So let's just talk about the opportunities I see. I have been a cheerleader in Harrisburg when I worked 8 years with Governor Casey and when I worked 8 years in the state legislature. And, the rest of the state doesn't necessarily view us with the lens that perhaps the folks on this call do. They kind of see Philadelphia as the city of crime, the city of gun violence, wasting state taxpayers' resources, that sort of thing. And my job, I think, in the Casey administration was to paint a different picture of Philadelphia, that we're truly the birthplace of America. We have wonderful manufacturing. We have a tourism and restaurant industry that's second to none if we do it right. And we're the economic engine for the state of Pennsylvania. And so now that I'm out of the state and I'm in the city, I think my job is to continue to be a cheerleader back up to Harrisburg and to the federal government that we're worthy of the resources we're asking for, and we're not going to squander them. I mean, I look at 2026 in Philadelphia as sort of the benchmark where I want to work every single day to make sure that when we're celebrating the 250th birthday party of America, that we've addressed the homeless issues, that we've addressed the gun violence, that we have reshored jobs back to Pennsylvania and back, hopefully, to the city of Philadelphia to increase our tax base. And I want to be that cheerleader because people are looking to the elected leaders. There's only 17 of us on city council. When I was in Harrisburg, I was one of 253, 203 in the House, 50 in the Senate. So 17 people and the mayor, are really the people that I think have to be out there and saying, we're open for business. We've just reduced our taxes. What can we do to either bring you in or keep you here so that we have that tax base that does fund the schools and does fix the roads and does keep the lights on?
Can you tell us a little bit about your committee assignments, which ones you're most excited about, and sort of what maybe your goals are for those?
So I'm on about, what we got, Tom, 13 committees?
I think you're on 7. You're at 7.
7, okay. And we're not a chair yet of any of them. Although, as council president pointed out, there may be some vacancies in the next couple months, depending on who chooses to run for mayor. I'm going to go in as the freshman on those committees and try and figure them out and understand them a little bit before I, try and insert myself. When I was in Harrisburg, I was the secretary of the Commerce Committee. I was often the acting chair of the Finance Committee. I was on the Insurance Committee, and I was on the Gaming Oversight. So I was sort of on the business committees of the state government. The ones we're on now, I think I'm gonna have to, this summer, this August, and hopefully early September, get to understand them better and see where I can bring some of my experience to those committees, and obviously work with the committee chairs.
Yeah, and it takes time for, especially just coming into it now, to sort of get the lay of the land on that. When you had mentioned being on more business-oriented committees in Harrisburg, do you think that business development and those kinds of things are going to be one of your key focuses on council?
Oh, absolutely. So prior to going into the House, I was the vice president of business development for the Philadelphia Federal Credit Union. The Philadelphia Federal Credit Union is the non-uniform, well, it started in 1951 as the non-uniformed credit union for the city. And it has grown to 130,000 members, a couple $1 billion in assets. And, I loved my job in bringing new members into that, and providing small business loans to a diverse community in Philadelphia. Sometimes the banks aren't as, well, they have a profit motive, of course. Credit unions are not for profit. So we would use our money to invest back into our members. And that's where I see my role in city government. The people that are paying us the taxes, we ought to prudently reinvest in the resources to provide, jobs, quality education, and that sort of thing. So I'm very much interested in promoting economic development, but both in the 6th Councilmatic and in the city as a whole. Like, in particular, Tom and I are working with a company right now that is interested in coming to the city. Only a couple of years ago, we worked with them to develop a site which is under construction right now in the Conshohocken area. I mean, listen to this. So they came to me and they want to re-onshore generic antibiotics. So 98% of the antibiotics that the United States used were from overseas. So you talk about homeland security. We were so vulnerable prior to COVID and now that we offshored all those jobs and all those manufacturing. So if the other governments decided at some point they weren't going to ship to America, they were just going to ship to other parts of the world, we would have been dying of all sorts of different diseases, hypertension, you name it, whatever we use these antibiotics for. We were very vulnerable. So it was important for us to hook that company up with the federal government. At the time, it was the end of the Trump administration, beginning of the Biden administration. And the Biden administration immediately saw a need for this and were very compelling and instrumental in helping us. But so they now will be open sometime this fall and creating lots of jobs in Conshohocken. They like the way Tom and I did business with them. They now want to expand in the city of Philadelphia. So we want to tell that good story. And Tom used to be vice president of the Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation. So he gets how that all works. And when he met with them, first of all, we were a little shocked that they wanted to come into the city because of the challenges we have. But they also see us as a major port and at a great rail and shipping center. So it fits their business model. But they, like other companies, have the same concerns when they bring in their executive to downtown Philadelphia and they come out of their hotel and they have to step over a homeless person, or they're fearful of the gun violence. That's a challenge we have to overcome.
Okay, I'd like to bring Denise Clay-Murray here on Philadelphia Hall Monitor.
Thank you, Councilman, for taking the time to talk to us today.
My pleasure.
I guess my first question for you is, you're taking over a spot that was held by a councilman that had been in that position for a long time, which means you're dealing with a set of constituents that are used to going to him for certain things. I guess my first question for you is, what are you hearing from your new constituents about their priorities? What is it that they want to make sure that you take on?
So quality of life issues in my district are big. So right now, we have I don't know, I didn't even know what a boom party was until this past year, but there's sort of these random gatherings of lots of folks that are having these real loud parties, and they're finding different spots to gather, and it's loud music, it's littering, it's open containers in the out and drinking, it's the pot smoking, just general lawlessness. And of course, we struggle with the police department right now because they just don't have the resources to sort of follow the potential boom parties that are coming out. So Tom and I are trying to assemble what we're calling a quality of life enforcement task force, where we're going to ask the Attorney General, the police department, labor and industry, so what are some of the other ones? Parks and Recreation, the park rangers, so that we're all in real time communicating so that we can prevent sort of these things, or just ask them to be more peaceful. If it just means lowering the music, being more discreet, taking your trash with you, that sort of thing, but we're hearing from my constituents that the quality of life issues are a problem. The short dumping at the end of the block that litters, the house next door that doesn't clean up, doesn't bring their trash cans in, doesn't do those sort of things. So we're going to sort of, without being heavy-handed, we're going to try and just teach block by block some of like good practices, tidy homes, tidy blocks, tidy neighborhoods, compliance with laws that are on the book, being respectful, and that sort of thing. So quality of life issues are big.
Now, what made you decide that you wanted to be in city council? Because you had to see, kind of the relationship that people are having with council right now, and that, a lot of folks are not necessarily happy with city council. What made you decide to take this on?
Well, that's a fair question, and it's not something that I took lightly. When the vacancy occurred, and some of the ward leaders in Northeast Philadelphia asked me if I would consider it, I actually asked for some time to reflect on it because I knew it would impact my family. because of the time that it would require. This is a 24/7 job. Not that my state rep job wasn't, but these are issues that are, and it's a much larger district than my state rep district. So, and I talked to my family about it, and I have 5 children. My youngest is in high school, last year of high school. And they said, Dad, you know, I think you can make a difference, and we would really be proud if you took on that new challenge. And then, of course, my wife, who hates politics, hates government, hates everything about all the jobs I've ever had, I think, she said, Mike, I think you should do this. And then I prayed about it. And when I talked to some of the folks that I could have potentially assemble, including Tom, who had a great job, and he said he would come on and join me and do it, I said, you know what? Let's give it a shot.
Now, having been a state rep in Harrisburg, particularly as a Democrat, that had to be an extremely frustrating experience. Do you think that this is going to be less frustrating, more frustrating, or just a different type of frustrating?
Whoa, maybe a little of all 3 of those. You know, we're going to set the bar high, so I'm sure not all our initiatives will be successful, so I'll be frustrated. But going from the minority to the majority is going to make a world of difference in terms of being heard and advancing legislation and initiatives, because it was so difficult on the state level to get anything past the majority party, that just having an ear in the majority party in the city, I think is going to make a big difference. Having said that, and I'll brag here, I have several laws that were passed over the last 8 years because I was able to navigate a little bit of the middle of the road, and I was able to position some legislation that I would explain to the majority party. It was just common sense, good things that ought to benefit the 12 million people we all represented. And so I feel proud that I was able to have that kind of dialogue. But I can also tell you, I had gun legislation that was common sense that they wouldn't even look at. I've reintroduced it every time I got elected. And I'm talking about getting ghost guns off the street. I'm not talking about restricting the Second Amendment. I'm not talking about, all the things that they espouse. I'm just talking about common sense gun legislation that would have protected the city of Philadelphia, to the extent where we even said, look, if you want to make all your laws in the other 66 counties, just give the city of Philadelphia the ability to make our own gun laws. And all you had to do was say the word gun and you were dismissed.
Now, what do you think you bring to the current council in terms of dealing with Harrisburg, in terms of lessons or advice that the current council doesn't currently have? And how do you think that can best be used to help Philadelphia maybe have a better relationship with Harrisburg?
Well, we did have a good relationship with city council, believe it or not. We Sherelle Parker was my colleague many years ago in the state house, and she understands the way Harrisburg works. And we had a liaison put in place a couple of years ago from Council President Clark, where we were able to communicate the state dollars we thought we had available, and then we would get the initiatives from Council President Clark. And we always tried to meet regularly to make sure the city's wishes and our ability to hopefully grant those wishes were met. But having said that, my former colleagues of a month and a half ago, I have a wonderful relationship with, and I intend to use that relationship to advance whatever initiatives that we see that we need from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, because there's a ton of money up there that the majority party will not let us spend. Their game plan right now, as I see it anyhow, is they want to win the governor's race. And then if they do, and they control the House and they control the Senate and they control the governor's office, then all of a sudden I think they're going to have the will to spend that money.
Wow. Okay, well, thank you so much, Councilman, and congratulations on your new, slightly less frustrating gig. And I'm going to
I didn't admit to that.
And I'm going to turn it over to Larry McGlynn, my co-host. Do you have any other questions, Larry?
Yeah, I have one last question, and maybe it's a little too early to ask this. But with City Council's fall session about 6 weeks away, do you have any thoughts on any legislative goals for this upcoming session?
It's a little early for that. We're batting some things around that, but we want to make sure we understand what's already in committees. Like, we haven't analyzed what's already been introduced. And then I'm still, believe it or not, trying to finish legislation that we've had introduced in Harrisburg. So I just share one that would impact the city of Philadelphia. A group called the Friends of Pennypack Park came into my office a couple of years ago, and they were about to disband. Well, they did disband their organization. They're essentially a group of volunteers that on weekends and holidays go to our city parks, in particular Pennypack Park, and they clean up. Well, the liability insurance from frivolous lawsuits were prohibiting them to raise enough money to pay the premiums and the insurance to protect them. And they were getting sued individually. So we authored legislation to amend the Recreational and Land Use Act that will mitigate frivolous lawsuits and give less liability on to the Friends of group, only like gross negligence, not, they'll be immune to somebody that might just fall over a trash bag that a volunteer put in the wrong spot. You know what I'm saying? The good news is we got it through the tourism committee unanimously. It passed the House of Representatives unanimously. It came out of the Senate Tourism Committee unanimously, and it is sitting teed up for when the state Senate goes back in September. If the state Senate does the right thing and passes that, Governor Wolf already told us he's going to sign it. And hopefully this fall, we're going to get Friends of groups reorganized and back out volunteering in our parks, not only in Philadelphia, but statewide.
Well, it's hard. It's always difficult to hear that volunteer groups have those kinds of problems. People who just want to do something in their community. So it's good to hear that something's being done about it. Councilmember Driscoll, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, and have a safe trip. Thanks.
And we would like to thank Councilmember Driscoll for being with us. And I enjoyed speaking with him. And it's good, I think, for people, not just people who live in the 6th district, but all across the city, to see who their new council member is, because the decisions he'll be making and the impact he'll have on council will affect everybody. And we'll have the councilman back on again in the fall at some point to see, where things are and how his transition's going. But I don't envy him with the transition he's making that quickly. One of the things that happens if you're elected to council the regular way, you win the primary and then you're elected in November and then you're sworn in January. The time in between when you win your election in November and you're sworn in, there's kind of like an orientation process where people come in and talk to you about, well, here's how the committees work, here's how local government works, and the people who run, I think for the most part already know those things, but it's good to have a little more knowledge on that, and then like a directory of where to go for certain issues. I'm sure Councilmember Driscoll had some of that, and had some of that institutional knowledge already, but to be thrown in with just a couple meetings ago and passing the budget and doing all that, I think that was probably pretty difficult. So it'll be interesting to hear more about his transition as we move forward.
Well, if he's looking for someone to talk to on that, there's a gentleman, and I'm sure you've met him in council. His name is Thomas Massaro, and he does an orientation for new council people, new state reps, and stuff here in the city to tell them exactly what the deal is, how to avoid a whole lot of ethical and legal pitfalls as they do their jobs. And he does this every election cycle. So I'm pretty sure that Councilman Driscoll's already had him reach out to him. And if he doesn't, that'll probably happen before the first council session, so that he can be totally and completely prepared for what he's going to have to do.
And before we move on, Denise, I forgot to do the thing I'm always supposed to do when we come out of an interview. You're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 16.5 in Philadelphia, Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website, www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHWWPPM. Now, Denise, we already talked a little bit about this. You are at the NABJ convention in Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, could you tell us a little bit more about what this is, and what are some of the maybe a couple of examples of like the panels and things that you'll be?
Okay. Well, first of all, a little history, because a little history always does good in these situations. The National Association of Black Journalists is the oldest organization of its type, in terms of like an advocacy organization for journalists from marginalized communities. There's also an Asian American Journalists Association that just had its convention in Los Angeles last week. The National Association of Hispanic Journalists is joining NABJ this week. And there's also a Native American Journalists Association and a National Lesbian and Gay Journalists Association. Those are the 5 major journalist groups that work with marginalized communities. There's also a South Asian Journalists Association and others, but those are the main ones, the ones I just mentioned. Almost 50 years ago, in fact, the 50th anniversary for the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists is coming up. NABJ was founded here in the city of brotherly love. And every year they have a convention where we, bring people in to talk about from all kinds of topics, ranging from the latest apps that you need to do good reporting to like tomorrow, there's a plenary session on covering mass shootings and gun violence, and how, who's on the front lines in terms of trying to get the problem of gun violence and mass shooting solved, and how reporters can report on these things without having issues of their own, afterward. There's also sessions on poverty. There was one on economic inequality that they had this afternoon, and there's also sessions on basic things like how to make public radio sound different, instead of everybody sounding like Terry Gross, having a sound that's more reflective of America and the people who currently live here. And also there's a massive job fair where if you're looking for jobs in television and radio and public relations, and there's even if you're interested in getting graduate school work in journalism, like Columbia University is there, the Chuck Newmark School at City College of New York is there, Temple University, me and Larry's alma mater, is there. And there's all of these different organizations and journalism outlets where if you want to get a job, you can look at opportunities. If you're interested in furthering your skills by going back to school, there's that. And there's also places where you can, get a massage, because there's an emphasis on health and wellness at this year's conference. So it's a little bit of everything that talks about the journalist experience, sessions where you can learn things, and also a lot of talk about how a lot of the same discussions that we've been having about diversity in journalism and how that makes journalism better, um, comes up a lot, specifically since it seems like folks are actually kind of tired of talking and want to see something done to make things change.
And that's one of the things I feel like, and I think we said this at the beginning of the show when we talked about all the questions that get asked about why don't we have more African American perspective in news. And I think a lot of those same, I've only been doing this for 4 or 5 years now. I began my career in politics and then as an English teacher before I did this. But I think those questions that you had been asked probably in school were the same questions we were talking about just 4 or 5 years ago. And I guess, and I don't mean to put you on the spot here because we didn't really talk about having this conversation beforehand, but why is it like that? Why hasn't there been enough movement from when you were starting out to now?
Well, here's the thing. When I first started out, and when I first went to Ohio State University to start going to school for journalism, this was in 1982. If you remember, the 1980s were the beginning of the Reagan years. And a lot of things were being cut. And particularly, we were at a point where we didn't want to talk about things like affirmative action. Now, there's a perception of affirmative action, and then there's the reality of affirmative action. The perception of affirmative action is that by using affirmative action, which basically is helping the people that started the race back in Cleveland catch up to the people who started the race from Philadelphia and never really had to move anywhere. It was supposed to be a means of helping people who have been traditionally disenfranchised due to a white supremacist system that we still don't want to talk about, get to a point where they're at the very least able to compete and compete without needing anything extra. And affirmative action programs during the 1980s got cut. And in newspapers for a while, particularly the newspapers in general, in particular, but in the news business in general, those cuts didn't really hit. Folks still recognize that if you want to reach all communities, you have to reach communities of color, also, LGBTQ communities, communities of different ethnic groups. You have to have newsrooms that reflect everybody who's possibly in them. But while everybody has realized that, journalism is still largely male, white, and upper middle class. And that's because a lot of the stuff that used to be put in place to address these problems got cut when newspapers started getting hit with hard times, especially after September 11th. There were a lot of programs at one time that tried to get journalists of color into the profession, like specifically minority targeted journalism internship programs. But the same people who believe that there's actually such a thing as reverse racism sued to have those programs done away with. And the business hadn't even gotten to anywhere close to parity before that. Once all of that was taken away, it gave people an excuse to not try to continue to move forward. And every year, the Association of APSE, it's a newspaper organization. No, American Society of Newspaper Editors. And I knew I was going to mess that up, so I'm sorry. They used to do a survey where they would ask all of the news organizations under their watch, mostly newspapers, to tell them how many people of varying minority groups they had in their newsrooms. For a while, everybody answered the questionnaire. Then, as time went on, fewer people answered the questionnaire, and now they don't. Now, no one does. And the goal through that questionnaire, through that survey, that study, was to try to get to parity by 2020. 2020 is come and gone. We're nowhere close to parity. And with the contraction in news organizations, where people have just been getting laid off in general, it's made a problem that was already pretty bad a whole lot worse, which is why a lot of the stuff that you learned in your class 5 years ago, Larry, still applies, because the mechanisms that were trying to solve that problem, for the most part, have been cut out.
Yeah, and you're still seeing that inequity in all things. It's not just journalism, but I think if you look at almost any sector, you're going to see kind of the same thing. And the reason I think this conversation is important, it's not just a conversation because this is our job, right? Because we're journalists, but journalism has a ripple effect throughout the entire community and city and state and everything, because journalists are the people who are providing the information and shining light on things. And if the perspective of any outlet is dominated by any one particular group of people, they don't have that experience to look for the other inequities. If you haven't experienced it and you don't have somebody telling you it exists, or enough people telling you, you might not understand how important that is. And I think that's one of the problems that all we're seeing in a lot of areas.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest here. If it's when you look at the news and you see what the priorities are in terms of coverage, in terms of who gets talked to, in terms of what subjects get tackled, it is all reflective of the composition of most newsrooms.
Yeah.
The reason why you don't see a lot of poverty coverage, or the poverty coverage you see is done mostly by small nonprofit organizations. The reason why what you see covered in terms of gun violence is just, this person got shot, that kind of thing. The reason why, you don't really see a whole lot of coverage of a lot of health issues that are affecting people in communities of color, and by extension the rest of the community, the reason why those things are not covered is because they're not prioritized. And the reason why they're not prioritized is because the people who might prioritize them are not the ones making the decisions. All you have to do is take a look at a White House press conference, and you look at the room full of people who are actually White House press corps reporters, and you might see maybe 5 people of color in the entire room. And that's because the percentage of people of color that are covering the White House, which everybody thought would go up a little bit when Obama was elected, it has instead gone down. And then when you also look at the number of people in newsrooms themselves, that number has also gone down. And that's gone down, and because it's gone down, the priorities reflect that. Which is why, like what we do and what folks like Chalkbeat do and what folks like Broken Philly do and all of that stuff, the reason why that stuff has to happen, or why it was created in the first place, was because no one was doing it. And no one was doing it because the priorities in legacy newsrooms don't think it's important. And if you don't think it's important, it's not going to get covered. And you're not going to think it's important if the people who are telling you it's important aren't at the table. And the people who are, telling you that it's important are here with me this week in Las Vegas, trying to get, legacy news organizations to realize that, yes, this stuff is important. There are recruiters here from the New York Times, from the Inquirer, from the Washington Post, from all over the place. And what they are trying to do is find journalists of color, because the most common thing that we get when we bring up the fact that newsrooms are still overwhelmingly white and male is that we can't find anybody. And conferences like this take that excuse away. Conferences like this one, like AAJA, like the NLGJA, like all the conferences that bring traditionally marginalized communities of journalists together are a way of saying to these news organizations, if you can't find someone to diversify the thought in your newsroom, it's because you're not looking.
Yeah. Well, and when I hear things like that, I think, well, no, that's not the case at all. So when I was in graduate school, a few years ago, we had, I thought the two best students in our cohort were both African American students, and right there, they're the ones who, there's the people you need right there, because they were brilliant at what they did, and we're not seeing that representation. It's right there for you. I look at somebody like our mutual friend and guest on the show, Vincent Thompson, who I think after you is probably one of the finest journalists in this city, and he's not working in journalism right now. He's on the other side using his skills as a communications person. But somebody right there with that institutional knowledge he has, not just the city council, not just of local government, but everything. Somebody like that, that's your guy. When you're looking for somebody who can explain to you what's going on, that's the guy. And it does bother me when I hear just what you said, like, we're looking for people. They're right in front of your face. They're here, And what also bothers me, and I don't want to pick on the Inquirer too much, but this is an example of this. The Inquirer has 24 sports reporters. And I like sports. I'm a big baseball fan, and I follow the Eagles. But you don't need 3 or 4 reporters writing the same story about the same game. Instead, maybe you instead of hiring that many sports reporters, you hire a couple people to do the work in the neighborhoods, or you beef up your city council coverage, and they have good city council coverage. I think the people they have do a good job there. But maybe you have somebody else doing that. And I think all the papers, all the big legacy media across the country probably fall into that same boat, right? That it's maybe priorities are a little misaligned here.
But what's ironic is at one time, the Inquirer had some of the best neighborhood reporters in the city out there.
Yeah.
And and this goes back to the contraction in newsrooms. As newspapers in particular were being bought and sold in this, and the people that were actually doing the reporting, the number of reporters got cut. Diversity was the first thing to go. Usually, if you hear about cuts to a news organization, the first 2 things that get cut are professional development, which is technically what this conference is considered to be, and diversity programs. Those are the first 2 things that are almost always cut from any budget when it comes to the bean counting aspect. And because of that, you end up undercovering neighborhoods, which is why when you do go into those neighborhoods, because someone was shot, no one will talk to you, because there's already this mistrust that has been built in by the fact that you don't show up for the rest of our stuff. if you don't show up for anything else, if you don't show up for the community block party or for when the street naming of the native son is happening, or if you don't show up when they're having some sort of event where the kids are doing something and they're doing something good, no one's going to talk to you when you come there and you're asking about the shooting that happened. And both stories are important, but we cover the shooting more than we do what else is going on in the neighborhood. And part of what we talk about here, or what in the conversations that we have here, is that need for balance. I've
Yes.
always told people on those few occasions when Temple has allowed me to teach, that people are a lot more willing to talk to you about the bad stuff if you at least attempt to show up for the good stuff, because then they know that you're not just there to talk about the bad things going on in their neighborhoods. They know that you're there to cover all the news, not just the bad stuff. And if you have more people who actually grew up in those neighborhoods or neighborhoods similar to those in the newsroom, having the conversation, saying, hey, look, this is what we need to talk about. If you have more people doing that, then you have a better shot of having a news product that benefits everybody. And that's that's kind of what we're doing here this week, trying to come up with a way to put out, to get people to understand that in order to have a news product that benefits everybody, everybody has to be in the room. And right now, everybody isn't.
So you've been there, what, less than 24 hours at this point, I guess,
Yeah,
right?
I got in last night.
Mm-hmm.
And here is a helpful hint. If you are ever on a plane and you see a whole bunch of children and they are being given chocolate bars, ask to be moved. Really, ask to be moved, because when you're on a 5.5 hour flight and you've got a bunch of kids that are high on Kit Kat bars and they're not going to sleep, guess what you're not doing either.
And I'll follow that up with, if you see one child named Owen McGlynn, 1.5-year-old, in the same situation, it's the same problem, even though he's only one person. So since you're only, have you been to any, has sessions started yet? Were you able to go to anything?
Sessions have started, and there was a really good one on income inequality that unfortunately I missed. But tomorrow there's going to be a session on covering mass shootings that I hope to pop in on. And there's also some sessions on data visualization, and how to, and this particular data visualization workshop is tailored to freelance people and people in small newsrooms, because while bigger newsrooms have whole departments that do nothing but data visualization, freelancers and small newsrooms don't. So they're going to give you tips on how to do that if that's you. There's also going to be workshops on writing, and I hope to pop into those. And also, different things about how to, report better, different kinds of topics that relate to poverty and different, just how to be a better reporter by giving you the tools to do it. And also some social issue kind of things. We're expecting some folks. I'm on the political journalism task force for NABJ, surprise, surprise. And we're supposed to be having one of our meetings, and we're supposed to be hearing from some folks from the Democratic National Committee. Now, it's an off the record session, so I won't be able to, come back and report on it. But hopefully, I'll be able to make some connections that people we can then have on the show, and we can have them talk about things. Pennsylvania, both for the midterms and in 2024, is going to play an outsized role, because whenever I say I'm from Pennsylvania, everybody's eyes light up. So it'll be good to have those connections if I can get them, so that we can share them with our listeners and viewers here on Hall Monitor.
Yeah, it might be something to look forward to in the fall for our listeners. So and this might be a tough question to answer right now, but everything we just talked about, the lack of Black representation in media,
Mhm.
at the end of this week at this conference, what is that successful first step to come out of this? What do you think that is? Is it
Well,
awareness? Is it, you know,
well, first of all, if folks aren't aware of the problems, they haven't been paying attention for the last 30 years. So I don't know what we can do in terms of awareness, but if you walk out of a convention like this with the kind of skills that you need to go into your newsroom and say, I think we need to do this, and this is what we need to do. This is how we need to tackle this. There's also a session on how to get your investigative report, your investigative reporting idea from idea stage to you get to do it and get it published or broadcast stage. That's important when you look at some of the stuff, particularly here in Philadelphia, when it comes to money from the soda tax, money from, property taxes, how property taxes are calculated, and all of the water department stuff that Lance Haver always shares with us. If you know how to bring an investigative report about those kinds of things to your editor, or even to somebody that you just want to pitch it to as a story, and say, I think we need to write about this. Here is what I found out already. Here is what I hope to continue finding out. I think we should publish this. That benefits everybody. That benefits readers, that benefits listeners, because it's additional information that they didn't have. And in addition to kind of showing people, yes, this is still a problem and we need to solve it, it also helps if you yourself walk out with information that you can then take into your newsroom and say, look, I know how to do this. Let me do it so that I can make sure that our communities know exactly what's going on and what they can do to make things better.
that's right. And
because let's face it, that is what our job is here. Our job is to present information to the community and allow them to give them the tools to make better decisions for themselves. And anything that helps us do that is a bonus.
yeah. And so the conference runs until through the weekend. Is that right?
Yes. I get back on the plane and head toward Philadelphia on Sunday night around 7:30 Las Vegas time, which means by the time I get home, it will be the next day. But we're here until Sunday, and on Saturday night we have our Salute to Excellence Awards. And my husband, Chris Murray from the Philadelphia Sunday Sun, is up for 2 awards. So we'll find out if he wins on Saturday night.
Great sports reporter and URD host, WURD host.
Yes.
And we hope for the best for him in those awards. Everybody who's nominated for that is deserving, but we got a local interest here, so it'd be great to see that. So Denise, thank you so much as always for walking us through that. And, we'll be excited maybe next week to talk a little bit more about it. What, some of the things you saw.
Because I'll actually have gone through a whole lot of plenary sessions and workshops, and I can talk to you a lot about what happened and who I met from the DNC that they're not letting me write any stories about because it's off the record.
All right. Well, Denise, thank you so much. Next week on the show, Councilmember Alan Dom will be with us. And Lance Haver, our consumer reporter, will also be here. So please come back next week to hear those interviews.